Hello, Alex here again, and welcome to another session on warehousing. In this session, I thought we'd talk about the Equalities Act. This will be the start of like a mini-series on the legislation that employees face in a warehouse. So what's the Equalities Act? What are equalities? What's it all about? Well, the simple answer that most people will come up with is that, everybody should be treated fairly. Yep, fair enough. But what happens if they're not? Where do you stand legally, and what can the law do if you are being discriminated against or treated unfairly? The history of the Act goes back more than just to the 2010 initiation. Started off primarily with the suffragettes, I suppose. Going back to the early part of the 20th century, women didn't have the vote. In fact, they didn't have many rights at all. Legally, they were still chattels, i.e. possessions. When a woman married, all of her goods that she possessed or what have you became her husband's, and she was basically just to be taken care of and what have you. Very few legal rights. And one of the big problems was that if you've got no rights, it would be nice, if people are making decisions about you, to have a say in it. And that's where the suffragettes came in. They wanted women to have the vote. So they started off as quite a sort of harmless protest group, but they started turning quite militant, chaining themselves to railings, disruption and so on and so forth. And they got their first martyr when one of them threw themselves under King's horse at Ascot. And it carried on with a series of protests and disruptions. Many ended up in prison, being unfairly treated in prison, going on hunger strike and so on and so forth. The First World War changed this. See, you can't have civil disruption and all of this stuff when you're trying to wage a war. So they cut a deal. The government said, help us stop this disruption and we'll give you the vote. And that's pretty much what happened. Suffragettes, their protests led to them helping out in the First World War, women in factories and so on and so forth, and not disrupting the flow of things. And at the end of it, they had the vote. But it still wasn't over there. Even as late as the early 70s, women still couldn't own a bank account, for example, or property without a man countersigning, so the husband or the father countersigning to say that she was of sound mind and body and able to count the pennies. Yeah. So that's part of the background. And also you have things like, to counter this, the Unfair Pay Act and various other bits. Also you've got racism, so you've got the Race Discriminations Act, Sex Discriminations Act. But as the recent debacle with the Windrush generation shows, doesn't necessarily hold true that immigration is sorted out, and that's a different kettle of fish entirely. Also, there were lots of protests in the 70s from the LGBT because, again, their needs legally weren't being met. And there were a few various acts brought in as well. And the problem was you had this act here, this act there, and various other little acts doing various other bits. And if you imagine a small employer trying to keep up to date with all of this. So what they did was they took it all and says, look, this is all primarily doing the same thing. So rather than having lots of little acts, we'll have one act with protected characteristics. And initially there were 6. You obviously had race and sex. Religion's a biggie, and that's always been a champion for democracy. So religion. You've also got sexual orientation covered, disability. Also, you've got things like in the latter sort of revamps as well. You've got as well. You've got age. We'll talk about that in a minute. But you've also got things like civil partnership and pregnancy, as well as gender reassignment. So from the original 6, with those last 3 bolt-ons, you now have 9 protected characteristics. So, first characteristic that I want to talk about is age. What's so big about age? Well, the problem with age is that, how shall I put this? Back in the day, when you hit 65, regardless of your physical condition, well, that's it. There's your gold watch or your carriage clock. Plays Big Ben. Aren't you happy? Bye. Enjoy your retirement. And off you went. And let's say you said, oh no, I've still got years left in me. I love my job. Tough. You retired. Bang. Out the door. Done. 65 compulsory retirement. Less for women. And that's okay as long as the rest of the assumptions made when we set up the whole cradle to grave retirement pot played according to plan. And the plan was quite simple. When you were 65, after a hard life of physical labour, you were knackered. You were done in, that's it. Ready for the glue factory. To help you along as well once you retired, they would have things like the test car transmission or pebble mill at 1 to help kill the brain cells off and see you into the grave earlier on TV. So there wasn't a lot to do. You could go down the pub, play dominoes with your mates, and statistically you were dead within 2 years. That, yeah, that's not what happened. NHS is another part of the whole cradle to grave, and the NHS has been particularly effective at ensuring we live longer. Also, better diet, food and exercise and access to facilities and so on and so forth means that we're not dying like we should be at 67 or 68. We're dying a lot older, 70s and 80s now, much more like 80s. Now, the original plan was to keep 2% of the population in retirement. You'd get a few statistical anomalies that would live into their 80s or 90s and that sort of thing. But, you know, we as a population can, you know, handle 2% retirement. A study done a few years back projected that unless they did something, then 2020, where this video is being made now, there would be 1/3 of the population of retirement age. Now, we could afford 2%, but 33%? No way, no civilization can support that. Not and run schools, and, wages just aren't going to cover it. And this has been a ticking time bomb that they've known about for ages. Thatcher tried to do away with the state pension, and we should all cash it in and privatise. That didn't work out too well. And now this in it to win it, employers sharing the pensions and that sort of thing. So they chip into your retirement as well. Probably a bit too little too late, probably for my generation anyway. So the other thing that they can do, as well as sorting out the mess that pensions are, because you would think that any sound, reasonable government, since they introduced pensions, would have invested wisely, had various bonds from other strong governments, dollar reserves, gold reserves, and so on and so forth, and general investments that grow with the population. No, they just spent it. Another form of tax. So, you've got the war chest, which we're busy running through at the moment, but no big pension pot. It's the working population that are paying this pension. Yeah. So what do? You probably a bit too little too late for crisis at the moment, but what you can do is raise the retirement age. And you do that gradually 1 or 2 years. Before you know it, 75 or something daft like that, 80 before you can claim your pension. And again, you're back to the tired workhorse that's only got 2 years to live. Suck a bet again. The other thing that you can do is make it illegal to fire somebody who hits that 65 or whatever, or gets too old and they want to turn you in for retirement. The wording, the way it goes, is that although they can't fire you for being too old, they can demonstrate that if you are incapable of doing the job anymore, then you should be let go. This is for age and infirmity. So what you'll find is that rather than the happy, wavy, bye-bye gold watch, it's now a capability hearing, or they make you reapply for your own job and change the spec so that you physically can't do it. So they're not getting rid of you for your age, it's just that you can no longer do the job you're required to do. Sneaky, huh? But basically, we cannot afford a high retirement age, high retirement number. And that's why it's become a protected characteristic. So that's age. The next protected characteristic is sex. As I said, you've got, the Equalities Act and those sort of things going on. But they weren't cutting the mustard. And again, there is still that disparity between male and female wages. And again, there is a bit of an old boys club, especially in the top 350 FTSE companies, as to why women can't get into the boardroom. You'll notice also that a lot of women go into education and do quite well in things like primary. In secondary, it's a bit more 50-50, but when you start getting into universities and stuff, it's the old boy network again in the upper echelons. And some of the excuses come up by industry for why there are no women in the boardroom include things like, well, it's very complex and we're not sure that they would enjoy the environment. This was the 2019 poll, by the way. You've also got, we've already got one. It's somebody else's turn to have a woman on the board. I can't hire a woman just because I want to. My shareholders don't care about the makeup of the board, so why should I? Yeah, it's still out there, even with the Act. But one interesting case was Birmingham City Council. Birmingham City Council had to put the Bullring Centre and the NEC up for sale, or at least the lands, some of the privileges and rights. And here's why. The employees have been complaining that there was this wage disparity between men and women for the same job. Now, this is in contravention, forget about the Equalities Act, this is in contravention of the old 1970s Acts as well, but they kept doing it. So what to do? Well, the employers took them to courts. After the court wanted a few more times or what have you, and they're still blatantly not doing anything, so it's high court time. They take them to court, and the court finds that yes, you've been blatant, yes, you are paying males and females differently, so you owe them some money. And we reckon that you've been doing this since at least, for about 10 years. So go and find everybody who's ever worked for you if they've left the company, pay them, but also all the people you owe this money to, you owe interest to as well. So you pay them what you owe them in today's terms. The original sort of award was about 300 million, but it's crept up by the time you've got various costs and other sort of things, 1.4 billion. So Birmingham City Council had to hock the family silver. So there is a bit of teeth behind this, and it wasn't that they weren't given any warnings. They're bloody stupid, they just didn't listen. So it came back to bite them. And this is the thing, there are payouts for this, and sanctions and other things that can, and this is why equality needs to be seen to be working. The various managers will still probably be quite misogynistic behind closed doors, but they need to be seen to enforce this. So therefore there is a lot of pressure to make sure that they have an equalities policy. So sex discrimination, you've heard of a glass ceiling. There are certain things that obviously, like promotion, that can be affected. I've already talked about the old boy network, and there is that effect there. Engineering, or those sort of trades, traditionally male, and can be quite exclusive. The armed forces, and again, one of the things with the Act and our general move towards equality is that women can now fight on the front lines. Not before time. You're seeing more female managers as well, and this sort of makes sense as well. Think about the world of the 1970s. We had heavy industry, we had car manufacturers, we had railways, we had steel, shipyards, and so later and so later. So we had quite a bit of male-dominated industry out there. So coal mines and so on and so forth, very physical labour and very male-dominated, where strength and endurance are seen as the key hallmarks of what you get paid for. Where there's muck, there's money. That world died. It started dying pretty much even before Thatcher got in. A couple of big recessions and some oil shocks, and various other bits. We've changed. The thing is, we're in a global marketplace, and consequently we're not just competing with some third world country without factories. We're competing Germany, very, very good at engineering. We're competing with America, China, India and Asia, and those sort of things. And these places are powerhouses. India, very much cheap labour, but quite a modern technology. China, similar sort of thing. And if we're to compete on this sort of level, then we need to be equally cheap on the labour costs. We need cheap materials and so on and so forth. We can no longer compete on that. Germans are doing quite nicely by high-tech, heavy engineering and that sort of thing, and car manufacturers. We don't have much of a car industry left, really. And anything that we do have, it tends to be owned by foreign backers. Well, I think we've still got Morgan. Yeah. You see the problem. We can manufacture and assemble things, but the world we now live in isn't as male dominated. In fact, we're a service economy for a lot of what we do. Thatcherism, for example, one of the things that she saw was making us into the Hong Kong of Europe. And so consequently, as well as the gateway to Europe for importing goods and so on and so forth, Hong Kong's big in banking. So she saw an alternative to our traditional heavy engineering way of life was, one, heavy investment in the banking sector so that we end up with world-class products that we can sell, things like life insurance, pensions and so on. The other thing as well is warehousing. That's the other coin of the gateway to Europe, so that we become that channel to ship things in cheaply. Warehousing, yeah, you're doing the course, so you understand the benefits of that. But as well as banking, we are a service economy, which means customer service. And, traditionally women have better communication skills than men and are better at customer service roles. And yet these are all the roles that we've traditionally said, oh, well, it's not heavy lifting and stuff, let's pay it minimum wage and see how it goes. Yeah. So we've now turned into a low-paid service economy, which is going to help keep us alive to some extent. But as far as manufacturing goes, we manufacture other things now, but it's no longer the exclusive heavy industry thing. We're big on high tech, you know, and our sciences. So skilled labour, and that you pay for. That's understandable. So the majority of the workers, if they're in a service economy and doing banking, admin, and customer service and call centres and that sort of thing, yeah, there's no longer any reason to pay men and women differently, because it's about serving your customers. Yeah, brute force, strength and endurance are no longer the key. Having an analytical engineering mindset, niche. So this is another reason why this equal pay thing needs to be sorted out, and equal hours thing. Other things that as well you need to look at with the equality, and it's hooked into another characteristic, is things like pregnancy and that sort of thing. A lot of employers will say, I'm not going to hire this woman at this age because she's likely to get pregnant and I'll lose her to the workforce. So ageism, sexism, and even the pregnancy being affected, that one. But there is this mindset out there that because you can take probably a year or so off once you have a child, that's a year that they're still paying for you where you're not working. A lot of employers can't afford that, but that's the world we live in. And rather than seeing it as, oh, I'll need to replace her but I can't, you're actually maintaining, like paying a consultancy fee or a holding fee, the same as you would for a lawyer, to make sure they come back. Pros and cons on the various things. Not a perfect setup at the moment, but male or female, you have the right to earn a living and to keep the job regardless, and to earn the same as everybody else. And pretty much that's what sex equality is about. Okay, next part that's protected is, well, racism. Race is a big issue, and it can be tied in with religion and culture and so on and so forth. And it's a difficult one, but it's not. Yes, there's lots of muddy waters and that sort of thing, like the traditional role of a woman in a Hindi family, and etc., etc. And again, people with anti-Muslim feelings, and that all Muslims must be Middle Eastern. Yeah, but racism at its core. Here's the thing about England: when people start waving the flag of St George and talking about English values and then getting skinheads and stuff, what the hell are you talking about? When they talk about pure English, I have got no idea what the hell you're on about. So let's explore this island. About 12,500 years ago, or thereabouts, the Celts started moving because of some natural disaster or what have you, or climate change, some reason, but they spread out. Some went into Turkey, some went into northern India. Quite interesting, there's parts of northern India where speaking Welsh is still viable. Obviously you've got what the Romans called the Celtae, the Germanic tribes. And then you've got us. Now you can tell how far the Celtic progress moved because of how they buried people. They buried people in big mounds of earth called kurgans. Before that, the indigenous peoples in England, Britain, would have been things like what they call the beaker people, who would, cremate or whatever, but they buried their people in pots. And when the Celts came along, the Picts or the original inhabitants here, who had been here since there was a land bridge onto Europe, got displaced. So this was very Celtic, lots of happy Celts. And then the Romans turned up and they occupied for quite a few centuries, and all of the traditional Celts got pushed out into things like Cornwall, Wales and Scotland. And the Romans wanted the land. This is prime fertile growing land here. So England, in effect, was still Celtic with Romano influence, but very less tribal warlike as the occupation went on. When the legions pulled out, England stuck with no real armed forces because the Romans didn't like other people being armed when they're occupying them, thank you very much. So in come the Anglo-Saxons and they take over. And on the back of that you've got, who else? Vikings, yes, the Vikings. They wanted their bit. Good series on Netflix about the Last Kingdom. Very good to have a look at. One of Bernard Cornwell's. But the Vikings turned up, and if you look at Scandinavia and those sort of where the Danes came from and those sort of places, all of the prime real estate has gone. It's owned by various kings and stuff. They've got whacking great big fortresses to make sure that they get. Everybody else is stuck with the mountain ranges and stuff. Not good for doing much apart from raising goats. So if you want land, you go a Viking, you go raiding, and gold as well. And there's always handy English monasteries, where they're just leaving the gold about, willy-nilly. So go help yourself. Land and prosperity for all. So the Vikings invaded. Then, just as the Vikings got sorted out, you had the Norman invasion. So everybody starts speaking French as well. If you go up to York, you can see lots of Viking names and that sort of thing. Whereas the Normans invaded, and guess what? The Normans are Vikings by default. They were originally Vikings that were harassing France, and the French king says, look, if you keep everybody else out, you can have the Normandy. So the Normans, very warlike, very Viking, they went and invaded England, won, yay, new king of English. And then you've got other settlers that are not warlike, but they're coming in. The Jews have been here, for example, since the 11th century. Then you have various, things like our empire and stuff. You're getting Middle Eastern influence coming back from the Crusades, and the British Empire, where you're getting influences and people's coming in from Africa, India, China, or at least Hong Kong, and various parts, because we were all around the globe. So you've got the influences and the people coming in. Then after various world wars, you get another influx of immigration. So after the First World War and the devastation there, a lot of influx in from Ireland to make up the labour force. You've also got, as I said, the Windrush generation after Second World War, etc., etc. So what we're left with is a hodgepodge country. It's not pure Celt, it's not pure Anglo-Saxon or white or whatever. And for anybody who thinks that, white superior, whatever, go back about 150,000 years and you'll see the first Europeans coming in to Europe from Africa. They've actually traced back mitochondrial DNA to a European Eve. Guess what, guys? She was black. Anyway, so we are now a cultural hodgepodge, and we're the better for it. Unlike some cultures you see, like America or what have you, where they zone off into ghettos, I think there's much more integration and mixture in the UK because we're too small. We can't spread out as much as on the continent or what have you. So we have much more influence from various cultures and peoples and what have you. So when somebody talks about British and being English or what have you, grow up, that world died out centuries back. We are a multicultural, and consequently, as a multicultural society, same applies to jobs and education and access to rights and so on and so forth. So racism, no. All sorts of nasty stuff will happen to you legally if you try it, especially as a company. Okay, so that's racism. Next part on the Equalities Act, obviously, is religion. So we've talked about age, race, sex. Religion predates the Equalities Act as a protected characteristic by some centuries. As I said in the last section, the Jews have been here since the 11th century, and if we were very hardcore, hardline Christian, we'd have turned up at a Jewish settlement's doorstep with burning torches and pitchforks and demanded they all convert to Christianity. Spanish Inquisition tried that. Iraq was remarkably unsuccessful. And, as I said, we've had empire and various other things. And with empire comes exposure to different religions and different cultures. Hinduism, Islam, whatever. Those are all the main biggies and so on and so forth. So consequently, we have become rich in religions. And if we were really hardcore against religion or other religions, there would be no Catholicism in the UK. Going back to Reformation, Henry VIII and the whole very Protestant and what have you. You have Catholics hiding out, priests hiding out in priest holes and various bits of buildings and what have you. But Catholicism would have been wiped off the face of the country. As it stands, the only sort of nod and wink to we don't really still like Catholicism is that, one, you can't have a monarch marry a Catholic. Bloody Mary saw to that one. And you can't have a monarch obviously turning to Catholicism themselves. Not just that, but strange and peculiar is that Catholic churches not allow bell towers, so they can't ring the faithful, So you'll find all Catholic churches, or a lot of Catholic churches, have these sort of like square roof type things, or one-story affairs, but no bell tower. So all of the Norman churches that you see around are Protestant. But Catholicism is still allowed in the UK. Same as Hinduism and any other thing. It is a basic democratic right to worship who you want to. And as soon as we start telling people who we can't worship, we're no longer a democracy. Any pretext that we have to being a democratic nation goes straight out the window. So you have the right to worship who you want. And if you say you should convert to Christianity or you should convert to this or that and try and force people, you'll get yourself in a world of hurt, because people have the right to worship who they want. Even I think Jedi was a recognised religion at one point. But I think a lot of people said that this is not the religion you were looking for. Move along. Pass. That's my joke. So religion, it's a biggie. And it's a cornerstone of our democratic government and nation and what have you, that you have this mix of ideas. Next section on equalities, we'll talk about disability. Yep, disabled people are out there. And it's not always obvious that you're disabled. Let's say that somebody has a bad back. It's not obvious that they have a bad back and that they can't do heavy lifting or various other bits, or even sit for long periods of time in those poxy office chairs you've got. But it's still a disability. So, what to do? Well, there's a couple of things that you can do. First is to make it illegal for somebody to not hire somebody just because of their disability. You don't have to disclose the disability straight away if it's not obvious. Wait until they've offered you the job and then say, just so you're aware, I have this disability. Don't then put them in a difficult situation unless the disability directly affects your ability to do your job. And the company must take reasonable steps, to ensure that your disability is catered for. Make reasonable adjustments. So a reasonable adjustment is not putting in an elevator on the side of your scaffolding so you can get your wheelchair up there to continue your career as a roofer. You physically can't do the job. And there are some things where you can actually discriminate against if it affects your ability to do the job. But other things you can't. So, for example, we've had blind receptionists. They don't need to see you to be polite to you, greet you, and carry out the paperwork or answer the phone or even do the computer work. You can get voice-activated software, various other things. But if it does interfere with your ability to do your job, then that's another matter. That's a capability thing rather than a discrimination thing. Now, that's all well and good, you say. But where's all this money coming from? Most small employers can't afford to put in ramps or do X, Y, Z or buy this software. There's actually a fund out there. And again, this fund predates the Equalities Act. It's more in line with the Disabilities Acts and so on and so forth. But I first came across it in the early-ish 90s, and how it worked for me. I had this student who had been blown up by an IRA bomb. Horse Guards Parade, paralysed down one side. And obviously, that's a problem if you're working in the office and you can only type with one hand. This fund bought software and hardware to enable us to purchase this sort of like circular one-handed keyboard. Once he got that sorted, happy as Larry, off he goes, and I can't remember where he got a job in the end, but he got employed. There is a fund out there that means that employers can put in a disabled person into the workforce, and all of the reasonable adjustments will be paid for. So if your back requires Darth Vader's bathroom for you to sit on with lots of twists and knobs and stuff to get it just right, it will pay for that. The thing is, that chair then becomes that person's chair while they are with the company. When they move on to another company, the chair stays there and the fund pays for the chair at the next company. Let's say that reasonable adjustments mean voice-activated software pays for it. Let's say that your disability means that you can't go on public transport. It'll pay for a taxi to work every day and back. Even if your disability means that you need a helper sitting next to you to help you do the job, it'll pay for that. So now there's no reason why you can't hire somebody with a disability, because the funds are there to help you do it. In fact, it's a positive marketing boon to have people with disabilities seen to be working in your company, because look at a lot of supermarkets. You notice there's a big age spread of employees, and that's because people like to be served by people that are similar to them. So if you're older, you like to be served by somebody perhaps of a similar age. You've got more in common and so on and so forth. If male or female, then you'll notice there's a good spread of male and female employees in a supermarket. Ages, races, and disabilities. So again, you'll find people with Down syndrome or various other disabilities working on the tills or working in coffee shops or in the warehouse section. And again, this is something that's a good marketing thing for the disabled customers, because they can see that this is a disabled friendly place, more welcoming. It makes good business sense. And also, I've worked for a disabled charity, and People with disabilities don't want to sit at home watching Pebble Mill at 1 or whatever it is all day. They want to be active members of society. They want to be out there and doing this because there's something that stops them from doing it in a traditional sense. Doesn't mean that they can't go off and contribute and pay their rent and have lives. So this is good on all sectors. It works all the way around. It's disability legislation. There's probably more that could be done or whatever. But you cannot discriminate against somebody for their disability. Okay? Moving on. Okay, so the next part of the Equalities Act, of the original 6 protected characteristics, is sexual orientation. Now, it's not that long ago, but it was illegal to be gay. You could serve prison time and get a criminal record and all sorts of social, etc., etc. In fact, as I recall, there were, when I was growing up, people would quite openly talk about going gay bashing. Yeah, odd. Anyway, an important incident happened in the early 70s. In New York, the local police liked to raid places like clubs and stuff. And unfortunately for the gay community, there was nowhere that they could go and be themselves in mainstream pubs and clubs. So they turned to the mob to provide suitable places to drink and what have you. Now, one such club hadn't paid its stipend, we'll call it, to the local police department, and they decided to go in and raid the place, bust a few heads in the traditional police fashion as it was at the time, and make sure the mob knew they had to pay their fees. So off they go, mob hand in, and they were expecting to be met by a bunch of limp-wristed fairy types that they associated with at the time, and expected to bust a few heads and generally have a good time, haul a few people off to prison. Now, if you're gay, that's a major thing for your career and prospects and what have you. And going into prison and getting a prison record. But it wasn't just gay, there were trans people there as well. And again, if you get arrested wearing the other gender's clothing and being gay and so on and so forth, not going to go so well. So these easy, we'll go beat them up fairies types, that's not what the police meant. They meant very determined, fit people who did not want to go to prison and get their heads busted, thank you very much. And they resisted. And they ended up serving New York's finest, their butts on a plate. So they had to come back and quell the demonstrations that had started, because this thing kicked off really big. So they had to come back with the riot police to sort this out. And strangely enough, protests started happening all over the place in sympathy for what was happening in Stonewall, the Stonewall district. And it's these protests that turned into what would later become known as Gay Pride. Those parades where people marched down the street, gay and proud. It had quite a political start. Now, there were still some people out there, I don't mind what they do as long as I don't have to see it mentality. It doesn't work like that, because as soon as this goes behind closed doors and into closets and stuff, you keep people in the, they tried that. It ended up with people being oppressed, ashamed, high suicide rates, you name it, and being ostracised by society. So the idea behind the whole gay pride thing is out and proud, or out and safe. Safety in numbers. So these big demonstrations started, and a political movement to ensure equality started in America. And we had similar sort of things happening here. So we introduced certain acts to safeguard people's rights, etc., etc. And this is what happened as well with the Equalities Act coming in. This is why orientation was a big part of the original act, so that people weren't discriminated in their jobs or XYZ, and they weren't publicly victimised in the newspapers or on the streets or that sort of thing. There's all sorts of reasons why that people should be protected. And again, the whole onus of the act is that you have the right to be yourself. You have the right to be black, yellow, white. You have the right to be Christian, Muslim. You have the right to grow old or to be too young. Yeah? And you have the right to love who you love. Simple as that. So, those are the 6 original protected characteristics covered now. In the next section, we'll look at the later additions. The 7th section of the Equalities Act that we'll talk about here is marriage and civil partnership. A lot of people, when they think of marriage, think of standing at the altar and declaring before some god or the other that they're going to be true and honest and faithful. And that's part of our traditional view of what marriage is about. But in reality, all it is you're forming a limited partnership in a company form of way. And let's explore some examples of why this is necessary. So actually, I can think of one. Imagine that you have a same-sex couple that have been cohabiting for 20 years. They're married in everything but name or what have you. Partner A dies, but with no legal protection or document to say that they're married, then the relatives can swoop in, sell off the property, etc., divide up whatever, and make partner B homeless and destitute. So marriage stops that from happening. You have legal rights and legal protection. Marriage means that your bills and debts are shared. So if the wife dies, then they can go after the estate to get recompense for any debts that she has. And it's the same with any other partnership. You become a legal entity, a company as such. So rather than a sole trader, you become a partnership, and you can prosecute members in that partnership, but also those members have rights. Especially, imagine a law firm where a partner dies. The other partners would take over, there wouldn't be any quibble about it. The company would still keep going, and all the company debts have already been managed anyway as an entity, and it's the same for marriage. So that's why civil partnerships are introduced, because you can have same-sex marriages with couples that suddenly have the same legal rights as any other married couple. Seems fair, doesn't it? Pregnancy. How sad is it that you have to legislate to protect somebody's right to become pregnant? As discussed in the earlier videos, a lot of employers are a bit twitchy about pregnancy because it means a long time off. Perhaps they could lose their employee, all sorts of medical and other issues, and so on and so forth. And in the past, you could find yourself dismissed or sidelined if you became pregnant. Now, this is actually sort of, could also be argued as part of the Sex Discrimination Act as was, but since only females can become pregnant, if you sack somebody for being pregnant, you're sacking them for being female, and yeah. They needed to legislate specifically to clear anything like that up. So women have rights, pregnant women have rights, and they have the right to have a child and then return to work. Now here's another assumption that's being made about a woman that falls pregnant. The assumption is that it's the woman who wants to stay home and look after the child. Could be a same-sex couple where it's both women and the other partner, or it could be that the man isn't earning as much as the woman and it makes strategic sense for him to stay at home and bring up the child. What's wrong with that? So if the main breadwinner, the woman, is getting sacked because she's pregnant, yeah. So that's why there's legislation involved, is to protect the rights of individuals and not to scaremonger being pregnant and all the dropping population, or if you like, the rise in unemployment that would come with that. Because that's what would happen. If somebody ends up on the job market with a very young child, chances are they're going to be looking at job seekers. And that is going to cost the government quite a bit. So it's in our economic interest to keep people working. They should probably do a bit more stipends and subsidises for companies, but that's another issue entirely. The last protected characteristic is gender reassignment. Okay, this is probably one of the most controversial ones because people always seem to have an opinion on it. Just a man in a dress, I hear quite a bit, or those sort of things from people and the media. And to give you an idea, going back to America again, some of the southern states, they can be quite conservative. And this idea of people who are born male, living a female life and using female changing rooms and restrooms and that sort of thing, struck them as abhorrent, because the only reason they reasoned that a man is wearing a dress is to go into these restrooms and spy on women. So it was some sort of perversion thing. And the women obviously wouldn't feel comfortable, so they're going to save their women folk from these nasty, perverted people or whatever. So they introduced toilet laws, and the toilet laws go like this. You must use the toilet of your birth gender. How are you going to enforce that exactly? I mean, for somebody like me, it's very easy to spot. Yep, definite male characteristics. Wearing a dress, keep out of the bathrooms. But suppose you've got something like a Thai ladyboy, or somebody like Jazz Jennings, who transitioned very early and looks female. Actually, she's had the op now, but imagine somebody with still the male genitalia going into a female toilet. What are they going to do? Panty checks? You know, bonkers. And again, the same goes for women who are not women at all, but want to be their male gender, even though biology has given them female characteristics. So women becoming man, female to male. You also have other people who are want to live in the other gender lifestyle, but don't necessarily want all of the operations. scary stuff, operations, big knives and needles and stuff. It's quite traumatic, so I can understand that. So you have a legal right to protection if you transition. But that still doesn't answer the man in the dress thing. I think it's disgusting and perverted and da-da-da-da-da. And then you get people playing the religious card. Okay, let's address some of those, because as I said, it's quite a controversial one, and it's probably worth exploring. MRI scans and CAT scans and various other medical things. Let's start off with a simple premise. Let's assume that male and female brains are different. It would make sense, wouldn't it? And science backs this up. Even your Victorian scientist can crack open the cranium, pull out the brain and weigh it and see that statistically male brains are larger than female brains. But there's another difference as well. And that is that if you take a top section profile using a scan, you've seen the scans where they come out different colours. On males, you get a big dark area in the centre. Females, you get 3 darker areas in a triangle like this. There's physically observable differences between the two brains. Guess what's happening with transgender? MRI scan or whatever of the brain, and yep, you've got a brain in the wrong body. So how the hell does that happen? All of us are genetically female when we start in the womb, but it is a testosterone drip throughout the pregnancy that causes us to form male characteristics. And again, estrogen drip and so on and so forth, or at least the default for us is going to be female. So no testosterone drip, you end up as female. If you get the testosterone, you end up as male. But like anything, long period drawn out, you could do, for example, making a female, testosterone drip. Oh, we're making a male then. Okay, let's go off and make a male. So you can have intersex. That's pretty obvious that you've got something weird happening with the genitalia, for example, or perhaps not. There are other conditions. But the mind? What happens if there's just the mother gets stressed and the testosterone drip shuts off at that critical point? Or if you set your female spike, female, can play all sorts of weird things with the brain. And that's what they think's happened, an interruption in the flow. So physically, you have a measurable, yep, that's a female brain, or yep, that's a male brain. Okay, so you also have people saying that, oh, I don't believe in medicating children or what have you. And they won't medicate a child. What they will do initially is send them to see a shrink. And with that in mind, the shrink talks to them, or counsellor talks to them, and they eventually say yes, you're a good candidate to transition. So the next step is blockers, and these stop puberty. So interesting stuff. And the legislation has only come in that allows hormones to be administered at 12, because originally it was at 16. But regardless, you don't get surgery until you're 18. Okay? So there's all sorts of steps and protocols to make sure that once you've done this, it's irreversible. So you better make sure you want to do it. And not always on the NHS, there are private practices and so on and so forth. There are also support groups and various other bits out there. Oh, this is a modern thing. We didn't have all of this stuff when I was younger. Yeah, you did. Have a look at a film called The Danish Girl. Not a brilliant representation, the book's better. But it's a true story. and it's about somebody that transitions in the 1900s. So, this condition has always been there, but hasn't been explored properly because of various social taboos. And then you have religious taboos. Religion is one of those weird things that people tend to take out of it what they want, and what a lot of people want, for example, Deuteronomy and those sort of things. Man shall not wear the garb of a woman, and a woman. What that boils down to was when the Hebrews first started forming and stuff, they had to do national service, because if you're going to go off and conquer Canaan and that sort of thing, you need an army. So you had a national service, and the way that some lads avoided national service in best Monty Python fashion was to don the garb of a woman and say, "No man here." So they said, that's very naughty, you can't do that. And also you had women dressing as men to fight alongside their menfolk, and that's naughty. So that's why that was introduced. There's another law that was, man shall not lie with a young boy, for this is an aberration unto God. And guess what? That one got changed to man shall not lie with another man, as this is not. Yeah, you can see how politics comes in here and the various bits of the day. So religion is very mucky waters, and they are translations of documents that we have trouble always interpreting correctly. Are you familiar with one that's it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get? The word for camel is very similar to the word for cord in Aramaic, and the exact translation is it's easier for a cord, big thick, to pass through the eye of a needle. But we've translated it as that. There's a few other things that I could point out, but pretty much people take what they want from religion, and usually it's pointed at some other social group. So you've got religion, you've got social taboos that go with that, people getting squeamish about it because it's sex, or they perceive it as sex rather than gender, which is personality, all sorts. Anyway, what this does is it recognises that people will want to transition, and it protects their right to do so. Lots of questions and stuff, but there's lots of websites out there that you can look at. Just be careful of some of the right-wing groups, because this does cause a few eyebrows to get raised and a few hackles to go up, which is bonkers really, because back to the basic premise of democracy and what have you, people have the right to be them. Okay. Final video on section on equalities. And this is just talking about the whole legislation bit. You've got all of these rights and what have you. So what? What can anybody do about it? There's a couple of things to take into account. For example, if you get unfairly dismissed and you go to a tribunal, usually unfair dismissal carries, the payouts are capped, perhaps £10,000 or that sort of thing, depending on why you were dismissed. Unless you can prove that you were dismissed because of your protected characteristic, then there's no top end payout, no cap. $500,000? That will do nicely, sir. So companies are very on this because of the financial implications. Also prosecutions and so on and so forth. Human Rights Commission, for example, brought a few prosecutions or supported prosecutions under the Act for people who were being mistreated at work. So, for example, one bloke had a heart attack at work, but because he was a subcontractor, they said, you don't have the normal rights of an employee. So went to court and found that, yes, he was a subcontractor, and self-employed, but this was the only job he had. It took up all of his time. He had no other contracts. Therefore, under the definition, he is a worker. So he got all of his rights. Another one, Wetherspoon Pub refused to enter travellers, allow travellers to enter, even though a big traveller convention in the town, and there were Irish and travellers, and it was an Irish traveller convention, so they were fined and prosecuted for barring people on the grounds of their race. There's lots like this, lots of small little things where you've got employees with everyday health conditions or other things happening that the Act is actually helping. It's not all big banner waving campaign things and scoring some sort of political points. It is genuine everyday people and protecting their employment rights. Have a look at some of the law sites. Anyway, that's all I will say on the matter. Till next time, happy warehousing.